Section 1. The orc died terribly. Not slowly. Grishnach's entire scouting party had simply ceased to exist upon the weathered stones of Eriador's eastern reaches. No corpses remained. No crimson trails painted the earth. There was only gouged soil where an entity of mechanical efficiency had harvested them, leaving behind a sharp, acrid scent carried away by the wind toward the misty mountains. Something unprecedented had arrived. Alex Mercer stood within the hollow of two collapsed monoliths, slowly turning his hands, evaluating the fresh biomass integration. 10 orcs. Their muscle density surpassed human baselines, their cellular matrix reinforced by an ancient, unnatural power. This was not radiation or genetic mutation, it was older. Mercer cataloged his inheritance. Rudimentary tactical doctrine, a hierarchical fear response woven into their very genetics, and fragmented memories of a colossal, blazing eye that left them feeling perpetually monitored. He filed that final detail with careful precision. Mercer had materialized as he always did, without warning, context, or invitation. One moment, a spatial fracture above a Manhattan skyline. The next, the freezing moorland under an unfamiliar sky, facing 12 armed beasts who mistakenly viewed him as prey. Their error lasted exactly 4 seconds. Complete integration required another 90. Now he understood his geographic displacement. This was no terrestrial continent. When he processed the night sky through the absorbed visual cortexes of the orcs, the constellations were impossibly, geologically older. The Blacklight virus had crossed into an environment lacking any biological framework in its vast archives. It wasn't a quarantine zone. It was an entirely different world. Mercer absorbed this reality without an existential crisis. He had died on a Gentech slab. He had been resurrected from viral code, a composite of consumed memories wearing the face of a flawed man. Panic was for organisms that hadn't already survived their own annihilation. Instead, he calculated. Pre-industrial setting, magic likely present, a massive territorial threat entity known as the Eye, executing a large-scale military operation. Pulling up the gray hood of his jacket, still his iconic shell, reshaped by the virus, Mercer moved southeast. The orc memories contained a residual, slavish terror of something small moving that direction, a target carrying an object that burned in their awareness like a hot coal. The ring-bearer. From the commander's fractured mind, Mercer mapped the conflict. A weapon of mass destruction shaped like a golden ring carried by a hobbit toward a mountain to be destroyed or reclaimed by its maker. Mercer, having been a WMD himself, understood the cold math of such a scenario. His contingency plan crystallized based on pure logic. Consume the ring-bearer, absorb the tactical intelligence, understand the weapon, then decide if Blacklight had a stake in this war. He tore across the moorland at triple human speed. Behind him, only the unnatural silence of the harvested earth remained. Somewhere ahead, a small creature carried an impossible weight. Mercer adjusted his vector. The thing everyone feared was always worth understanding first.
Section 2. Mercer's biological radar pinged an anomaly at 40 meters. He shifted from a high-speed sprint to a calculated stalk, processing the environmental data through Blacklight's continuous sensory broadcast. The virus mapped organisms like a predator tracking blood, reading cellular decay, thermal signatures, and the electromagnetic hum of stressed nervous systems. He could isolate a soldier in a crowd by cortisol levels alone. But what he was scanning now defied all biological logic. There were 4 figures huddled in a depression below a rocky ridge. 3 were small, hobbits, the orc memories confirmed. 1 was a taller human standing watch with an unsheathed sword. A dying campfire cast a feeble glow over them. The standard biological signatures were present: exhaustion, malnutrition, advanced cellular fatigue from relentless travel. Mercer cataloged it with automated detachment. But the figure in the center, the smallest, sitting apart with a hand unconsciously clutching his chest, was a glaring error in the data. He was wrong in a way that registered like corrupted code. When Blacklight reached out to map the anomaly, it hit a wall of static. It was an interference pattern so alien and dense that it didn't register as a living entity. It registered as a metaphysical claim. Something had branded this creature, Frodo Baggins, a name the orc memories supplied with horrified reverence. It was a brand outside Mercer's vast biological framework, and he deeply distrusted it. Blacklight had consumed super soldiers and infected monstrosities, yet it had never encountered a force that actively pushed back against a passive scan. Crouching motionless on the ridge, Mercer observed. The companions slept in shifts, but Frodo remained awake. The hobbit stared into the dark with an expression Mercer recognized from 1,000 consumed minds, a casualty carrying a burden slowly becoming indistinguishable from his own identity. The ring hung from a chain around the hobbit's neck. Even from 40 meters away, through the wall of static, Mercer felt its presence like the radiant heat of a distant furnace. Consuming the ring-bearer remained the most efficient path to absolute intelligence. Frodo's mind held the weapon's properties and coordinates. Yet, as the virus probed Frodo again, the interference spiked. Beneath the static of the ring, there was a secondary layer, a cellular stubbornness in the hobbit himself that completely baffled the virus. It wasn't raw strength or magical power. It was a profound, quiet resistance. The word that drifted up from the absorbed orc vocabulary was unexpected: purity. Mercer rarely paused, but this biological impossibility demanded it. The aura draped over Frodo was immaterial. The ring wanted with the mechanical, relentless execution of a malicious software program. Attempting direct absorption of a metaphysically compromised target carried non-trivial risks. It could introduce unpredictable variables into the Blacklight architecture. Observation would precede absorption. Down below, Frodo finally closed his eyes, his hand locked on his chest. The ring continued its silent wanting into the dark.
Section 3. Gandalf the White sensed the biological corruption long before his eyes found its source. While his physical senses were far sharper than men or elves believed, his true perception lay in the deepest architecture of his being. As a Maya clad in mortal flesh, he carried the memory of the music of the Ainur, the great foundational theme that had sung all of Arda into existence. He knew its patterns as intimately as a river knows its ancient bed. And currently, moving through the rocky expanse of the Emyn Muil, was a note that the music had never composed. He tracked the disturbance by what was missing. Ravens avoided the moorland airspace. The northern wind carried a scent entirely lacking in elvish translation, a sterile blend of clinical sickness and ozone. Furthermore, an entire orc patrol had simply vanished, leaving violently churned soil and the cold residue of an apex predator that had fed and departed. Sitting atop a boulder overlooking the river Anduin, the gray pilgrim smoked his pipe and pondered. The fellowship was broken. He knew this not through sight, but through the specific rippling grief that permeated the world when destiny splintered. Frodo and Samwise had gone east, the quest dangled by a frayed thread. Gandalf had urgent matters calling him to Rohan and Gondor, carrying the full, blinding fire of Aloran. Yet the anomaly in the Emyn Muil required his immediate attention. He located Mercer at dusk. The entity stood on a rocky shelf above the river, gray hood raised, possessing the absolute terrifying stillness of a hunting machine pausing to process new variables. Gandalf approached openly, his staff clicking rhythmically against the stone. The figure didn't flinch, merely rotating its head with a fluid, mechanical smoothness impossible for human joints, regarding the wizard with terrifyingly void eyes. "You are a long way from anywhere familiar?" Gandalf spoke in the common tongue, sitting on a nearby rock with the casual authority of an immortal. "So are you," Mercer replied. His voice was a flat, synthesized construct devoid of hostility. "You're not human." "Perceptive." Gandalf blew a smoke ring. "Neither, I think, are you. Though what you are is a question I find myself genuinely uncertain how to answer. I'm a contingency." "For whom?" "Still determining that." Mercer studied Gandalf with comprehensive patience. He was categorizing the entity, placing it in the realm of the genuinely unknown. This creature was not of the shadow. It lacked Sauron's malice or Morgoth's ancient taint. It was a wound in the world, operating entirely outside the moral polarity of Arda. "You've been following the Ring-bearer," Gandalf stated. The ensuing silence confirmed it. The orcs knew about him, a massive, focused intelligence, but the ring itself is anomalous. It resists my biological mapping. "Naturally," Gandalf tapped his pipe. "It is not biological. It is a fragment of a soul, bound by dark craft and the terrible will of a Maya. You cannot consume it because it is not alive in any sense your methods comprehend, though it is profoundly aware." Mercer's posture shifted a fractional degree. "You know what I am." "I know you are a thing from outside the song." Gandalf exhaled smoke into the breeze. "I do not know who you are, but I must ask. The hobbit cannot carry this burden much longer. Every second matters. What exactly do you intend to do about it?" Section 4. Samwise Gamgee had not slept deeply in 6 days. His body broadcasted this fact through persistent fatigue behind his eyes and aching joints, but his mind willfully ignored it. There were too many things requiring vigilance. The shadows, the path, the unseen threats, everything needed watching. He was merely a gardener from the Shire, entirely out of his depth, yet he stood his ground as the sole line of defense. He was actively watching when the hooded figure dropped from the rock shelf above their camp. The entity landed with absolute silence, lacking the biological need to absorb impact audibly. It merely displaced space. Before Sam's rational mind could process the danger, the hobbit was on his feet, planting himself between the intruder and the sleeping Frodo. Sam's chin was raised, his hands trembling, but his stance projected pure, immovable defiance. "Don't you come any closer," Sam warned. Mercer halted. Blacklight's rapid biological scan processed the data. One halfling, elevated cortisol, severe fear response, yet biochemically locked into a protective stance. The neurological signature indicated a subject who had made a fatal decision and would not retreat. Mercer filed the hobbit under a rare classification, immovable. "I'm not here for you," Mercer stated evenly. "No," Sam agreed, his voice remarkably steady despite his shaking grip. "You're here for Mr. Frodo, and you're not getting to him." Behind Sam, Frodo stirred and sat up, his hand reflexively clutching his chest. When Frodo's eyes locked onto Mercer in the gloom, they held something far more complex than terror. It bordered on recognition. Instantly, the ring's interference pattern slammed into Blacklight's mapping systems like a metaphysical shockwave. The static pushed back against Mercer's sensory tendrils with an alien sensation the virus registered as hunger. It was not Frodo's hunger, it was the ring's. Mercer stood absolutely still. The ring was actively reaching out to him. It wasn't the slavish compulsion it forced upon men, the whispers of grandeur and power. This was an evaluation. The ring was probing Blacklight with the clinical assessment of a predator, examining a potential weapon, calculating if the virus could be wielded. "Sam," Frodo's voice was strained but calm. "Let him come closer." Sam shot Frodo a look of profound betrayal, then glared back at Mercer, his expression clearly stating that while he heard the order, he vehemently opposed it. Mercer closed the distance slowly, monitoring the ring's shifting interference. At 5 meters, he stopped. Frodo looked up, his eyes partially eclipsed by the ring's heavy burden. Mercer could read the cellular degradation, the agonizing erosion of the Hobbit's physical and mental architecture being consumed from the inside out. The irony of his own viral nature was not lost on Mercer. "You've been following us," Frodo observed. "Yes." "Why?" Mercer processed the question. His base contingency was running, but the ring's aggressive assessment had introduced severe complications. "The thing you're carrying," Mercer replied, crouching to the Hobbit's eye level. "It's trying to use me. It's not offering me power. It's evaluating me as a weapon." Frodo maintained eye contact, his gaze holding a tragic, weary solidarity. "Then you understand," Frodo whispered, "what it's like." Mercer filed the interaction deep within his archives, right next to the immovable gardener. He didn't answer, but, crucially, he didn't leave. Section 5. The Witch King of Angmar found him exactly 3 nights later. It was not a chance encounter. The 9 moved across Middle-earth on the precise vectors of Sauron's omnipresent will. The Eye had been monitoring the anomaly in the Emin Muil with the clinical focus of a grand strategist evaluating a wildly unpredictable variable. Mercer was entirely alone. He had expanded his perimeter around the Hobbit's camp hours past midnight, hunting down 2 more orc scouts to update his tactical mapping. Crouched upon a basalt outcropping overlooking the valley, he felt the ambient temperature plummet 15 degrees in 4 seconds. The darkness condensed, suffocating and unnatural. The Nazgul plummeted from the northeastern sky atop a massive fell beast. It landed 30 meters away with the terrifying, weightless grace of an entity that viewed physical reality as a mere formality. This was the Lord of the Nazgul, a former Númenórean king who had traded his humanity for a ring of power and received an eternity of hollow servitude in return. Mercer scanned the arrival with cold, flat efficiency. The results were startling. No thermal output, no cellular division, no biochemical signature. In a purely biological sense, the Witch King did not exist. It was an anomaly of negative space. "You are not of this world," the Witch King's voice echoed, a horrific acoustic phenomenon, sounding like a transmission forced through a vacuum without vocal cords. "No," Mercer agreed flatly. "And yet you move through it. You consume. You grow." The ancient, broken intelligence paused. "The Dark Lord finds this interesting." "I find the Dark Lord's interest inconvenient." The temperature dropped another 5 degrees. The fell beast emitted a compressed, guttural hiss. "Inconvenient. the Witch King echoed. "You consumed our servants. Their terror became your database. Their strength became your fuel. The Dark Lord wishes to make you an offer." Mercer had calculated the probability of this exact dialogue since he first absorbed the Orc commander's intelligence. A military machine as sophisticated as Sauron's wouldn't just attack an asset, it would attempt to assimilate it. "Say it," Mercer prompted. "Service," the Wraith hissed. The black light spread freely through Mordor's vast armies. Unlimited biomass, unrestricted evolution. In exchange, the ring-bearer is intercepted before the mountain. Mercer initiated a precise calculation. If the Blacklight virus was unleashed upon Mordor's staggering biomass, it would achieve a level of planetary dominance that Manhattan had never seen. Mercer would transcend into a godlike superorganism. But Mercer knew the trap. He had died because of corporate offers of more. Power offered by tyrants was always a leash disguised as a crown. "No," Mercer stated. "You refuse the Dark Lord. I refuse the constraint." Mercer rose from his crouch, abandoning his human disguise. Tendrils of black and red biomass erupted from his shoulders in a horrifying display of apex biology. The Witch King drew a blade of Morgul steel that ignited with a pale, cold fire. "Then you are an obstacle." "I've been called worse," Mercer replied, and the black light erupted forward to meet the Nazgul.
Section 6. The primary tactical flaw in fighting a Nazgul was the absence of organic material. Mercer launched a tidal wave of biomass, enough blunt force trauma to instantly dismantle an armored tank, but the tendrils phased through the Witch King's shrouded silhouette like smoke through an open window. Blacklight found zero cellular architecture to consume and rewrite. The king was merely negative space, bound by a ring's claim. The secondary, far more critical problem was the Morgul blade. When the Witch King slashed through an incoming tendril, it didn't cleanly sever the flesh. Instead, a freezing spectral fire surged up the biomass. The virus didn't register this as physical trauma, but as erasure. It was the metaphysical unmaking of biological existence. Mercer forcefully severed his own tendril, retracting 3 meters to recalibrate. Instantly, the massive fell beast struck from above. The monstrous wyvern hit Mercer with the force of a falling meteor, driving him into the basalt shelf and shattering the ancient stone. But Blacklight thrived on kinetic absorption. The virus redistributed the massive trauma instantly, repairing microfractures in real time. He was on his feet in 0.8 seconds. However, the Witch King loomed above him, Morgul blade raised. The spectral fire pressed against Mercer's consciousness like a suffocating hand. Mercer rapidly calculated a drastic countermeasure. 3 days prior, a lesser Nazgul had been temporarily destroyed at Weathertop. Its physical anchor had dissolved, leaving behind a corrupted electromagnetic residue in the soil. Mercer had passively absorbed that lingering biomatter. Now he forcefully decrypted it. The Wraith memory hit Mercer's consciousness like liquid nitrogen injected directly into the brain. It was the horrific reality of an immortal consciousness warped by millennia of lightless obsession. Through this corrupted lens, Mercer glimpsed the architect, Sauron. He perceived a mind of staggering, terrifying complexity, hyper-focused on domination, and at the core of that will, the One Ring was endlessly screaming into the void. Through the Wraith's severed connection, Mercer felt the frequency, and through that frequency, the eye snapped its attention directly onto him. Mercer executed an emergency cognitive shutdown. He violently severed the Wraith memory, quarantining the corrupted data deep within a locked partition. He collapsed to his knees on the fractured stone.
The Witch King stood 10 meters away, observing the internal battle rather than striking. Mercer assessed the catastrophic breach. The connection had lasted exactly 4 seconds. In that microscopic window, Sauron's vast awareness had touched the Blacklight virus, mapping its parameters. The Dark Lord hadn't invaded, but he had catalogued the anomaly. "You saw him," the Wraith rasped. "Enough." Mercer stood up, the virus actively purging the lingering Morgul erasure. "Tell your master the answer remains no." The Wraith mounted the fell beast and descended into the suffocating darkness, abandoning the skirmish. Mercer watched them vanish, his processing units running millions of new probability models. Sauron had the data. The contingency plan had just escalated into a catastrophic complexity.
Section 7. The golden forest of Lothlorien unequivocally rejected his presence. Mercer registered the barrier before he even saw the ancient Malorn trees, a crushing, deliberate atmospheric pressure at the border. It wasn't a physical fortification, but a defense woven into the very metaphysical fabric of the earth. Blacklight projected its sensory mapping forward and was hit by a signal so overwhelmingly alien it took 3 seconds to categorize. It was sheer, uncompromising clarity. Lothlorien saw right through him. It pierced the absorbed biomass, the meticulously constructed human disguise, and the cold processing algorithms, staring directly at whatever remnant of Alex Mercer still existed at the core. The forest did not attack, nor did it offer sanctuary. It simply perceived him. Mercer stood perfectly still at the perimeter for 11 minutes before the defense force materialized. 6 Galadrim appeared in the branches above him with bows drawn. The elven captain descended with the fluid, impossible grace of a being who had perfected movement over thousands of years. The elf's eyes bored into Mercer, reading his dark, bloody history. "You carry death in your skin," the captain stated in the common tongue. "Yes," Mercer acknowledged flatly. "And yet you come to Caras Galadon?" "I come to coordinate with whoever commands the defense of this region," Mercer replied, keeping his hands open to communicate non-hostility. "The Eye is aware the Ringbearer moves toward the Anduin. I possess strategic data regarding the eastern deployment, and I require counsel." The elven captain analyzed him with ancient eyes. "The lady will see you. Whether she speaks with you is her choice alone." Stepping into Lothlorien was like being submerged in a temporal ocean. Blacklight's biological scanners returned impossible data. The flora was alive on a register that defied cellular biology, sustained by a localized preservation field. Where the One Ring projected consumption, Lothlorien projected a fierce, tragic refusal to let beautiful things wither. Galadriel awaited him at the base of the greatest tree. She didn't radiate forceful power, but a sheer, undeniable cosmic weight. Upon her finger, Nenya, the ring of adamant, held the sanctuary in a stasis against the encroaching shadow. She looked at Mercer with piercing accuracy. "I had a mirror," Galadriel spoke commandingly. "It showed me futures possible and conditional. It did not show me you. Would that concern you? It tells me you originate outside the song of Arda. You are a lacuna, a silence in the music. I cannot read your fate because the threads of this world do not anchor you. I'm aware." Galadriel stepped closer, shedding her diplomatic grace. "You came to offer tactical data, but your true purpose is to understand your own nature. You want to know if Blacklight is a plague or a cure. Show me the mirror," he requested. "No, but I will tell you this. You have already died, Alex Mercer. What you are now is a question the virus asks in your name. The answer is unwritten."
Walk with me, share your intelligence, and I will teach you the true nature of rings of power. Section 8. Galadriel's lecture spanned 2 hours. She delivered the history with the unhurried pacing of an immortal, allowing the catastrophic weight of the lore to settle into Mercer's processing centers. She detailed the forging of the Rings of Power and how Sauron weaponized the elves' deepest desire, the urge to preserve beauty and halt the decay of time, turning their own ambition into a metaphysical snare. She recounted the exact moment she comprehended the trap. The instant Sauron placed the one ring upon his finger, it was a psychic violation so immediate and absolute that she and the other elven bearers tore their rings off in a synchronized heartbeat. They felt the overwhelming pressure of a vast, alien will testing the boundaries of their souls. Mercer absorbed this data, revising his foundational models. He suddenly understood the nature of the interference he had felt above the hobbit's camp. The ring hadn't been attempting to recruit him with promises of power. It was running a diagnostic. It recognized Blacklight as the ultimate biological delivery mechanism, a self-replicating vessel for Sauron's will, unbound by the physical weaknesses of the Nazgul. The virus could spread the Dark Lord's influence at a cellular level, an apocalyptic weapon invisible to elvish magic. And the strategy was already in motion. The wraith residue he had consumed at Weathertop wasn't accidental battlefield salvage, it was a calculated injection. Sauron had deliberately sacrificed one of his 9, leaving a corrupted fragment precisely where the viral anomaly would consume it. The 4 seconds of psychic contact during Mercer's battle with the Witch King wasn't an interrogation, it was an inoculation, an infection spreading from the Maya to the virus. "You knew," Mercer stated. "I suspected," Galadriel replied softly. "Sauron does not discard the 9 without a master stroke in play. The question remains, did the infection take root?" Mercer initiated a comprehensive audit of the Blacklight matrix, scouring the quarantined partition for the metaphysical fingerprint of Sauron's will. He found it. A metaphysical thread, thin as a spider's silk. The ring had planted a hook. It wasn't strong enough to dominate him yet, but left to fester, it would convert Blacklight into Sauron's instrument. "Can you excise it?" Galadriel asked. "Total removal requires amputating the entire memory partition. I would lose the Wraith's intelligence, the geographical mapping of Mordor, and the 4 seconds of insight I gained into Sauron's mind." "And what he showed you," Galadriel warned with piercing directness, "was precisely what the Great Deceiver wanted you to see. Every second you process that data, his hook deepens." The calculation took 0.1 seconds. The intelligence was a Trojan horse, curated by the greatest manipulator in Arda to subvert a system that implicitly trusted its absorbed memories. Mercer excised the partition in 1.3 seconds. The localized deletion was absolute. Blacklight cauterized the void instantly. In the aftermath, Mercer felt a sudden, profound lightness. "The Hobbit needs to reach the mountain," Mercer declared, stating a hard-locked objective. "I'm going to ensure he does." Galadriel smiled. "Yes, I believe you are." Section 9. The Black Gate of Mordor had never witnessed a siege engine quite like Alex Mercer. He intercepted the vanguard of Sauron's eastern army 3 miles out from the plateau of Gorgoroth in the darkest hour before dawn. Mercer struck from the north at terminal velocity. The leading battalion, 400 heavy infantry Uruks bearing the red eye on black iron shields, had exactly 2 seconds of cognitive awareness before the Blacklight hit their lines. Mercer didn't pause to consume. Biomass acquisition was irrelevant. The objective was pure kinetic displacement. He tore through the ranks like a localized hurricane. His whip fist cleared 40-meter arcs, while the blade form sheared through iron, shield, and flesh with brutal rhythm. His sole purpose was to force the column to break and waste critical hours regrouping, buying time for the two tiny figures ascending the slopes of Mount Doom 20 miles away. The 2nd Battalion flanked him from a basalt ridge, unleashing a massive volley of black-fletched arrows. Blacklight absorbed the projectiles mid-stride, the biomass flowing over the impact points and reforming. Mercer pivoted and charged directly into the archers, shattering their cohesion. Their collective panic registered on his sensors as a massive spike of cortisol and adrenaline. Breaching their lines, he targeted the siege artillery. The massive battle trolls presented a denser anatomical challenge. Blacklight adapted in real time, analyzing tissue density and recalibrating the strike angle. Mercer sent the massive wooden catapults tumbling over the ridge in a cascade of splintered timber and crushed stone. Then, the sky darkened further. The 8 remaining Nazgul descended. They converged from all points of the compass in a flawless formation orchestrated by Sauron's mind. Simultaneously, the eye of Sauron snapped its full, terrifying focus onto the skirmish. Mercer felt the metaphysical pressure of the Maya's attention bearing down on him, accompanied by a furious, ancient rage. The Dark Lord's perfect calculations had no mathematical framework for a viral superweapon dismantling his army. Perfect. Mercer unleashed a total biological release, expanding the massive accumulation of biomass harvested over 3 weeks. A localized tidal wave of black and red tendrils erupted from the ash, striking the Nazgul formation and dragging the shrieking wraiths from the sky, stripping them of their aerial supremacy. The Witch King dove through the chaotic mass, plunging his Morgul blade directly into Mercer's core. The metaphysical erasure detonated, unmaking the virus at a conceptual level. Blacklight screamed as its architecture was systematically deleted, but Mercer held his ground with the same stubborn defiance he had witnessed in Samwise Gamgee. The virus frantically rebuilt itself around the expanding void. And then, 19 miles away, the universe violently realigned. Mercer felt the metaphysical pressure instantly vanish. The suffocating weight of Sauron's gaze was catastrophically extinguished. The invisible tethers controlling the Nazgul snapped. The Witch King dissolved into mist mid-strike. Standing amidst the deafening silence of a broken, fleeing army, Mercer processed the victory. Frodo had done it. Mercer had provided the necessary mathematical variance to clear the board, but the ultimate triumph belonged to a starving halfling, his immovable gardener, and a specific brand of purity that Blacklight had no biological equation for. As Mount Doom violently erupted, Mercer watched the scattered orcs flee into the wasteland, and he let them run.
Section 10. The ash blanketed the world for 3 consecutive days. It fell over Mordor like a gray shroud, softening the harsh, jagged geometry of the Black Land into something eerily peaceful. The ancient, corrupted forges that had burned relentlessly since the Second Age choked and died, smothered by the terminal convulsions of Mount Doom. Mercer walked through the fallout at a measured, unhurried pace. For the first time since his resurrection in Manhattan, stillness did not equate to vulnerability. Beneath the falling ash, Mercer processed a sensation adjacent to completion. The grueling tension of his contingency plan had finally unwound, leaving behind a vast, quiet processing space. He evaluated his initial algorithms and found them fundamentally flawed. He had modeled the One Ring as a weapon to be acquired, and the War of the Ring as a pure tactical equation. The model failed because the core variable defied logic. The defining factor of the entire war wasn't raw power or magical supremacy.
It was the biologically inexplicable phenomenon of Samwise Gamgee standing his ground on a dark ridge, physically trembling, his cortisol levels spiking in absolute terror, yet remaining fundamentally immovable. Mercer sat on a ruined parapet in the northern stretch of Sauron's collapsed fortress, turning this concept over. He had consumed thousands of soldiers, absorbing their bravery, a neurological suppression of fear. But Sam's defiance was different. It operated in a metaphysical register where rings of power resided. It was a variable Blacklight could map, but could never consume, because loyalty and love were not constructed of cellular tissue. He was still running these calculations when Gandalf the White arrived. The wizard materialized through the gray haze atop his great horse, sitting beside Mercer on the ruined wall as a distant dark tower collapsed with a muffled rumble. The Eagles are currently transporting the ring-bearer and his companion to the fields of Cormallen, Gandalf spoke softly. Frodo will recover. Samwise Gamgee, I am told, is already inquiring about the availability of food. Mercer processed the update. Deep within Blacklight's architecture, a response fired that approximated profound relief. Good, he said. Indeed, Gandalf produced a small flame, lighting his pipe. You bought them the crucial margin. Middle-earth owes you a debt it will likely never know about, though I suspect you didn't do it for Middle-earth. I didn't, Mercer agreed. Then why did you do it? My initial model was incorrect, Mercer replied. The ultimate outcome relied on a variable I couldn't directly manipulate, his ascent up the mountain. I dislike variables I cannot influence, so I forcefully manipulated the ones I could. Gandalf offered a genuinely amused glance. That is the most profoundly Alex Mercer answer I could have imagined. Gondor will require unusual strength in the coming days. You could come to the White City. Mercer stood up, shaking the accumulated ash from his gray hood. Not yet. Gandalf nodded. The road goes ever on, the wizard quoted. Mercer looked across the map of Middle-earth. The organizing darkness was gone. What remained was a complicated, organic world figuring out its existence in the absence of a supreme tyrant. Mercer had no contingency plan for a world at peace, but as he stepped off the ruined wall, he found himself genuinely curious.